but I think I've presented a couple of times here in this forum, so I just wanted to recap quickly, set some context, and then talk about where things are at with this. So the goals here are to basically allow developers to eliminate outlier metrics due to issues that might be happening on the local machine during browser load or user agent load or high CPU usage, or some other metric that or factor that we might be interested in here. I think previously this was called system entropy, and I think we've received a ton of feedback that nobody likes the name, that there are these discrete values, and providers are really interested in knowing like why things were necessarily slow. And then we also talked about a while back in October of 2023 that it needs to be sort of exposed in a privacy preserving way. And so the last time we met, we actually, the takeaway that I had was that we would go run an origin trial in Edge for our customer that needed this. We would collect some data and then apply like a randomized response local differential privacy algorithm on the entries that we sort of collected, and then see if we could debias the data to see if we actually got useful information out of it. So we did that. And so basically in the original data, what we were seeing was that for system entropy levels that were considered high, and high here really is just, the only sort of factor that we implemented was, is this navigation during a browser launch? The average time in milliseconds was about, 1760 milliseconds. And then in normal, it was, 1468 milliseconds for a total of, 1500 milliseconds in terms of averages. So then we locally, we had collected all that data, we had saved it offline, and then we went through on that data and ran a randomized response on top of that. And so the averages shifted sort of quite dramatically in terms of the high and normal things that you can sort of see here. And so this data by itself is like effectively useless because there's, less than 100 milliseconds, and it doesn't really accurately represent the delta that we saw originally. And so then what we did was we went and actually then tried to debias the data. And when we debiased the data, we actually, we didn't get quite back to the exact differences that we had. We did get back to something that was sort of fairly representative and within, I think 60 or 70 milliseconds of the original averages, whilst, continuing to preserve, everything else. So my takeaway from that particular experiment is that this feels like an avenue that's sort of worth continuing to pursue, because it does allow website developers and RUM providers to sort of pivot some of this data in aggregate, but also isn't particularly useful in identifying or fingerprinting a single user, just because like the data is only useful in aggregate when you can debias it. And I've actually included in the deck here the algorithm that I use to debias the data. So if folks want to, go and check the math, the math is all sort of available for people to go review. And so that sort of then leads me to two different. So I think there's like really sort of two questions that I would have for this group. The first group one is like, given this data and given sort of what we've seen here, do folks sort of generally feel like this is continuing, useful to continue pursuing, or should we stop and call it done? And then the second sort of question that I would have is, assuming that we do think it's worth pursuing, I have sort of two rough proposals, and which ones do we think sort of would be a little bit better to sort of proceed down. And so I'll go over those proposals and then open it up for discussion, and we can go from there. So proposal one is that, you know, and again, subject to bike shedding and naming conversations and whatever else like this, effectively doing something like this, where we introduce a new object on the performance navigation timing object that captures any additional data that we think is useful, where all of that data is effectively has some sort of differential privacy algorithm applied to it. And so, you know, I've just called it here for the sake of conversation, additional data, and introduced the randomized trigger rate is effectively going to be the epsilon value that you need to like decode the data in aggregate. And then, you know, you can start seeing here the payload as it's coming out. The pros of this, like, it sort of fits into the existing model that we have. It can be exposed by, like, you know, you can call to JSON on the main object and upload that if that's what we need to do. The downsides is really like the data is, as it's exposed in JavaScript, there is like effectively useless to web developers. Like there's nothing that they can really sort of do with it or infer from it. The second approach is plugging into the reporting endpoints API. So we could introduce a new HTTP response header that sort of plugs into like the existing reporting endpoints API, and then that would then result in this sort of payload being sent. Again, I think we'd have to probably send the whole object because we want to correlate all of that data, not just parts of it, as part of that payload. And so, you know, so I think that there's you know, some interesting sort of opportunities there. If we really needed to get to it, the info could be made available by the reporting observer API, but, you know, it wouldn't plug into any of the existing like any of the existing performance navigation timing sort of payloads. And maybe the format of this needs to change a little bit, but this is sort of roughly the approach that I would sort of position. So I think that's everything that I wanted to sort of share with the group. So like just wanted to open it up for discussion and get folks' perspective.